All right, welcome back to Resilient Voices and Behind. I'm so excited to bring another episode here to you guys. I believe this is episode 35. Don't quote me. I've been doing these so much and so forth. It may be a totally different number, but I think I'm close to that. But I just, before we get started into this, I just want to say thank you guys. I'm getting ready to end out season one, and as I continue to bring guests on, that have many different backgrounds and many different stories. You guys have continued to show your support and appreciation for what I'm doing here. And really, just being completely honest with you guys, this has nothing to do with me on a personal level, more so of what I would like to see happen at a universal level. Because, starting these conversations, having these stories being heard, I believe this can invoke real change, not just at the federal level, but at the state level. Because as I have many different people from different states explaining their stories and their child welfare systems, some of these states don't actually know this is what is happening, or this is how their experience was, or if it was good or if it was bad. Do they need to tweak this or do they not need to tweak this? So in hopes of just educating, and invoking some of those change, this platform was created. And I just want to thank you guys for rallying around me with that. But without further ado, I'm excited for the guest today. It's such a wonderful guy, strong advocate, and he inspires me each and every day. I got a chance to just read, what he does, and I don't know if you guys have ever had that experience. Like, you've talked to somebody numerous times, and then you sit down with them and you finally talk to them at a deeper level, or you read something about it, I didn't know he did all that, and I was just like, wow, this man is just such a powerful being, and I'm just so excited for you guys to hear his story. So without further ado, have you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello, and thank you for the opportunity to be, on this podcast. I just think this is a really great project that you're working on here. So my name is Scout Hartley. I live in New Jersey. How do I introduce myself? My gosh. So I am someone who has lived experience in foster care. I entered the system in New Jersey and exited in New Jersey. And really, when I exited the foster care system, I actually started to recognize the problems of the foster care system. And I can talk more deeply about that in a bit, but just, it was, and when I kind of aged out, that's when I entered the work of, advocacy and movement building. And since then, really over the last 10 years or so, I've been privileged and had the opportunity to take a lot of opportunities with various organizations on a national level, a few on a state level. So I think that your emphasis on state matters is really critical for a lot of reasons, but it is really true that the stories need to be shared universally. But yeah, so outside of my work in child welfare, I also am a Ph.D. student at the Rutgers School of Public Affairs and Administration, where I really hope to blend together my lived expertise, the opportunities that I've seen, the growth that I've seen in a lot of the young people, really starting to kind of do a lot of the storytelling and connecting with the academic community, and also making sure that the literature catches up with a lot of the success stories and also the failures that we've really seen in child welfare. So that's probably more a tangent. I know you said not to mind that, but in any case, that's a little bit about me. For over the last 10 years, like I said, I've just had a lot of opportunities to work in the child welfare space, also in, my academic studies. And the other thing I'll say too, just for people, because it's a token I do take pride in, it's a note to tell people, to and be ambitious. I was so happy that I had the opportunity to be an adjunct professor. I've taught 2 semesters, a semester and probably, a half, but state and local government and American federal government at my community college where I actually graduated from years before. And it's really because actually a lot of the opportunities that I took advantage of while in the child welfare space. the things that you see, the dynamics that you witness, the conversations you get to engage in, that's a level of political science that's beyond theory, but speaks to theory. And because of opportunities like that, it was really one of the strong factors that got me hired to be an adjunct at age 28, which was a dream I had for a long, long time. So just a long-winded way of saying, you don't know where you end up sometimes. I just took all the, everything I could take advantage of for the time that I could. And, sometimes you don't even know what you're building up to until you get there. There's a certain grace to that.
Awesome. And you kind of segued into my first question. And you kind of really touched on this a little bit, but my first question is, if you could take us back and give us a synopsis of your experience in care in New Jersey. Like, what was that like? What did that look like? And so forth, towards whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, well, so my experience in the foster care system is really unique, and honestly positive in the sense that in my home where I grew up, there was a period of time where I actually, I didn't live there. I had what we would call like informal kin, actually. I was living with a close friend for a few months. And then after that point, I got formally entered into the system. Then I, had a few different custody shifts with my father, and then I was placed in kinship, all in a very brief period. I was lucky that my aunt and uncle, who I lived with in kinship care, they also were in the same neighborhood, literally just a few minutes away from my house. So I didn't have to travel. I stayed in the same school district. And I got to maintain all of the connections. My friends didn't actually know that I was in foster care until I opened up about it. And that was just to speak to the normalcy that I had. So when I spoke to earlier how I aged out, and that's when I learned that the system was broken in so many ways, is just because I had this unique experience. My caseworkers, were always super involved. I'm comfortable sharing that, around age 16, I had a substance abuse issue, and I was experiencing major depression. I spent some time in a facility, and got inpatient care, and like everything that should have happened. My caseworker had everything coordinated with my school. I never missed a day. I had a private tutor come out. And I was never isolated from my parents either. That was something too that I always appreciated. There were the legal things they had to say, and there were the kinds of things that I understood that there was a toxic environment for me to be in. But I never felt that they were never vilified. They were all these dynamics, everything that honestly should happen. If you could write a handbook of what foster care should look like, I honestly believe happened to me. And I only say that because it's a level of privilege that has been shocking literally every single day since I aged out, because I just can't imagine, the way I think about it as a metaphor, like if you were just to change any dial in my life ever so slightly, I don't know where I would be. And that's the story of so many young people who don't have the things that I had. And I just really, that's what fuels me to do this is those experiences. So my story in care is, relatively straightforward. I didn't age out in kinship care. When I was 18, I left and then was independent until I aged out. And again, my caseworkers were super great. Like, they were responsive. I got checks. I was connected with Chafee programs above and beyond. And it's only to speak to the example that this sets of the way, like the potential of the foster care system. And well, I won't say it like that, but it's really the potential of good people. I think that that's really what made the difference. I think that irrespective of the policy, and this is one of the reasons I study public administration as well, is because I think that we have a concept of government and a concept of public service that policies set the trajectory of actions. And that is partly the case, but that's not always the case. A lot of the times it's just having good, caring people. My caseworkers, I actually learned the word avuncular, which is being like an uncle, because I used to read the dictionary, and I was looking for a good word to describe my caseworker, because he just, I got along so well with my caseworker. I never felt like he was a caseworker. He felt like a family member. And I just, all those things were very formative for me. And even when I needed the help, I got the help, and I aged out. And, but again, that's like, it's an interesting contrast and an unfortunate contrast and a really dramatic one that speaks volumes. But that's just, yeah, I mean, and I have to say, like, I'm because, and the reason I mentioned not feeling isolated from my parents at all, I've been able to kind of go to therapy for years, and still the work is never done, but come to terms with a lot of things. And I talk with my mom every day. My father passed, unfortunately, due to his alcoholism. But, my mom got the help that she needed. And, I'm proud for all of that, because I think that there was just the disruption was minimized in all of our lives. Maybe, I can't speak for my mom, but like in my life, the disruption was minimized so much that, foster care didn't feel like foster care. I didn't even know that was like really a term until I aged out, really.
Definitely. And you dropped a lot of different nuggets there. And one of my next questions to that is, you experience a sense of community that never really left. And due to that experience and that value of community and village, you were able to transition successfully. And I'm pretty sure, as you spoke, there were some barriers, and maybe barriers that self brought on, but you continue to persevere throughout those. I do have to ask, because you mentioned something, and feel free to answer this question or not. Tell me, nah, I'm good, Michael, or whatever. You mentioned that you experience substance use, but and you mentioned that one of your parents experienced that. In that space of experiencing that, because as well as I know, when we're advocating, we're talking about generational things and things that we do because of unhealed spaces. Do you think those had a direct connection together to your experience with that and your parents?
Yeah, I do. And it makes me emotional to think about a lot, because, I think that alcoholism really had a lot to do with the toxicity in my home. And I'm really thankful for my mom and being able to, persevere and grow. And, unfortunately, like I said, my father, he succumbed to that illness that I think of it as. And I think, I definitely think that there's a generational aspect to that. And I think that there's also an element of my parents also, and I think that this is not uncommon. I think that was their way of processing stress and processing grief,
right?
And processing trauma and expressing things that you can't say, maybe, or without verbal therapies or other kinds of things. And I think, I think that a lot of those generational things, in more ways than just substance abuse, speak to the dynamics that go into homes. I think that that's just kind of a sociological thing as well. But yeah, and I think, I'll say too, to that point, when I got out of the program, I went to NA meetings, Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, for a brief period. And my mom still works her program too. And I still, from like 10, I haven't been in 15 years or something. And whenever I was 17, so 12 years ago. But I still think about the serenity prayer, and just some of the kind of pieces of just grace and taking it day by day. I think that there's a level of wisdom to all of those approaches, but it's about persevering and it's not about abstinence per se, like I drink alcohol. But I think that for that purpose, I think that there was just that blended into a lot of the toxicity in my home. And I think it does generationally, because I'll just say, those things are generational.
Definitely. And the reason I asked the question, because, similar to, maybe your experience and many others, going back and backlogging throughout my process of healing, I needed to, like, I knew I wasn't going to get the right answers from my parents, you know. For one, my mom had many strokes by then, so the answers I could have got from her wasn't happening. My dad was forever wherever he was, you know. So what I did was try to retrace their footsteps, you know. And by doing that, that gave me a sense of healing and a sense of answers, you know, because I later learned that, you know, no, the abuse, the projecting, you know, and what have you, that my parents did was not okay. It was not okay. I'm not, by no means does that excuse it, but what example did they have to be better in society or parental wise, you know? And I look at the generation where my parents were brought up in, where mental health was still around, but mental health wasn't nearly close to what we see in a professional sense of a therapist or whichever. You know, there was still mistreatment with mental health. There was still misdiagnosis and, you know, cultural stigmas and labels, especially being African American, like, no, we gonna pray about it, you know, or that's the devil, you know, or different things like that, you know. So there's been a significant change. So I had to take a look at that. Okay, my parents didn't have a perfect picture either, but that doesn't excuse what they did to me, you know. And once I got to a place of grasping that, and I'm not saying everybody can do this, because, you know, yeah, I know there's some people out there, and not making nobody mad. You know, I know some people out there like, you know, excuse me, you know, bump my parents. They should have did what they did, you know, and you have the complete right to say that. But for me to get to a place of further and what I wanted to do, because I work with former foster youth and alumni on a daily, and I see the chaos and turmoil and hurt and trauma that they're still carrying. I can't carry my own and try to help them. It's not going to be a beneficial. So I had to work through what I needed to work through and get to an understanding that was appeasing to my heart and my mind. But that's my little tangent, you know, and so forth. But you said that you aged out. So I'm intrigued because I live in Michigan and so forth. What did that process look like for you? 17, 18, aging out in New Jersey, and was there any supports after, and what did those supports look like?
So before I get to that, I just want to call out the wisdom of what you had just said too, because I think that that's kind of where that's how I healed, and that's how I got to a place where I was able to kind of. It took me years to get to the point, and I don't mind if she hears this because I know my mom will listen to this. It took me a long time to get to the point where I can truly not forgive, but, you know, like you had said, none of that was okay. But I think that the way I think of it was just like my mom was someone who, and my father as well, you know, to the point that you'd said about the kind of how people didn't talk about mental wellness. I just think that they didn't have the best environments, and there was such toxicity in their upbringings, and it reverberates, like it's the echo of history. And I think that, you know, one of the things that I withheld from saying earlier, but I feel comfortable saying now that you shared, and it just kind of makes me feel comfortable saying, is like, you know, I think that there's a generational aspect, and I think that it's something that is like prevalent in my family to some extent. And yeah, you know, so, and I think that, so I definitely just want to call out the wisdom of what you had said there. And I think that it's a process that you go through and you get to, and also it's a process that you land on your own. And that might mean, like you had said, bump your parents. I've never heard that. I like that. But something, you know, to that effect. Anyone can come to the conclusion that they want, but it's about getting to the place where you can heal as much as you can and grow and persevere and know that you're not bad, or that those things aren't indelible in you. You know, you're not your trauma. But in New Jersey, and so I appreciate you sharing that. But to the point about New Jersey, my aging out process, I aged out at 21. So it's not like federally. There's a way that some states can extend their care to 21 per like federal guidance with the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act. But New Jersey doesn't comply with that. They have their own state-based version where they have aging out services to 21 that they don't receive federal money for. But I aged out at 21. The process was honestly really fine. Like my caseworker met with me 2 years before I aged out and started saying, the clock is ticking, and let's get you into school. Let's get you, what you need. And then after I aged out, New Jersey has something called the New Jersey Foster Care Scholars Program, and it's basically like post-secondary support. It's ETV funded. And it's their ETV is education and training vouchers. And it's basically their way of providing like post-secondary or college, universities, vocational support. So I had that until I was 23. And then when I was 23, then I was officially, that was very quick. That felt very quick in the sense that there aren't really caseworkers for NJFC. So like no one's doing permanency planning with you or something like that, so you turn 23, you just stop getting the check and you figure it out. And that's just, I was always working full time, like 60 hours a week, but I just had to kind of up it. That period was quite stressful, but my partner, thankfully, was the breadwinner at the time, just, made more money than me. So she largely supported me. For years, honestly. But yeah, so the aging out process was somewhat seamless in the context of what other people experience. Mine was planful, except for when I turned 23. That was a little rough, but not incredibly unfortunate.
Definitely. And the reason I asked that question is because we get so many different answers. Like, aging out looks different from state to state. And I'm a person that I like to invoke questions, and invoke questions to get maybe an answer. And one reason I asked that question is, for the listeners to think, because I don't truly know who all is listening. I hope that we have, Foster alumni. I hope that we have some people who work with legislation, whoever. I share this all over, so I'm pretty sure somebody between all those different demographics listening. But it's unique, and I don't know if that's a good thing or if it's a bad thing. Because we could probably weigh pros and cons of not having a uniform. Okay, this is what it looks like, federally. Or, because states have different demographics and different way they move, maybe this is what works for this state and this is what we need and so forth. So I'm a person, I think about that, especially in my advocacy, because I don't only just do advocacy at the state level. I've been doing advocacy at a federal level before I even did most of my state work and stuff like that. So it's been interesting to just see, like, from the West Coast to the East Coast, what we do different to the Midwest, and to the Central United States and so forth. It's very interesting. And just to speak to like my experience, I was told to wait until I finished high school, and it wasn't seamlessly smooth. The conversations happened. We had what we call family team meetings, even though it's not real family, but you have your caseworkers in your team there and stuff like that. And we had young adult voluntary foster care, which extends to 21. We have ETV and different things like that. But because of like aging out for myself, and two things led to me being homeless. In insecure housing, and I would say misinformation. Misinformation hurt me the most. And advocacy, I see this a lot, we we sometimes feed a fantasy kind of dream that when you get to this place, it's all okay, and if you've ever, see somebody or work as a youth care worker or whichever, or in these fields where you're like in direct contact with clients that are in residentials or whichever, we all have said it. Well, this is not gonna last forever. Once you get here, you good, And I believed in that wholeheartedly as a youth. So when I aged out in the state of Michigan, what happened was I was like, all right, they told me get to college. You got it, like you good. Like, so I thought literally getting into college, getting into that seat, sitting down, I was okay. And then I had to raise my hand, had to do all these other things that wasn't really explained. And I know it'd be like, oh, well, that's common sense, why do you, but my thing is like, going out, especially for me, and I know this may be different. For me, I spent most of my time, a bit of almost 11 years, in some kind of residential institution, from juveniles to group homes to residential facilities, what have you. In one of those kind of facilities, I spent some time out, but I spent majority of those 11 years in those type of facilities. So when I finally got into society where it was my own demise, I had to break down institutionalization. I had to find my way out of trauma, the re-traumatization that I got from being in the system itself, on top of the trauma that I did not heal from past experience. And then I had to find my way into positive relationships with people and understanding what that is to be able to be a functional member of society. And that I shared that because transition, it looks different, and it's something that we have to have a conversation about, and that's another one of my little tangents. But to bring us back,
it's a good tangent, honestly. I think that there's a lot in there that like is important. Do you mind if I just say, like, in terms of the state government thing, that's one of the reasons I mentioned New Jersey's policy, because I think the thing that fascinates me the most about this work, and I don't mean to intellectualize it, but it really is fascinating, and it's just this really adaptive dynamic where it's like, but the reality is in our government, and because of the U.S. Constitution, specifically the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, that by and large, a lot of public services are carried out by states and localities. So there's this kind of just constitutional reality about child welfare and foster care, that these things are mostly going to be carried out, almost entirely going to be carried out on a state level and on a local level. And the federal government plays a very like administrative role, I might say, in a broad sense. And I think that dynamic is not only really important, but it's one of the most critical pieces of the movement that I think might be misunderstood as well. That there's a big phenomenon in our country called like nationalization of state politics, where state political issues are becoming national issues. So, things that you might hear on CNN you'll hear at a state board, school board meeting or something like that. And there's this interesting, it's like almost like a tug of war between this pull towards being nationalized in terms of where our state priorities are, but then the reality that like if we shift too much away from states, then we're missing the point, and we're only doing an injustice, honestly, to children and families. And I'm not like a states' rights kind of person or something. I think that there's just there have been various models of federalism, what's called federalism in our country throughout history. It's really just about like what you're talking about, leaning into this conversation, because these things get the messiest when it comes to traditional services for older young people as they age out and after they age out. That's where the disproportionality tends to be the worst. It's where the disparities tend to be the most. It's where public services and legislation and administrative authorities get the most complicated and interwoven. So what you're saying is critical for a lot of reasons. And it's an element of political science that I hope to honestly talk more about too. And that's my way of framing it, because I think that that's what we're really talking about actually, is a political dynamic and a systematic reality that isn't going to change. Like, that's one of the reasons Family First is structured the way that it is. That's every piece of federal legislation. And yeah, so it's not tangential. It's actually really critical to these conversations. That's like the legal reality of it.
Definitely. And since you brought it up, since you, because one of the biggest reasons, why I wanted to bring Scout on is because he has a beautiful mind, if you don't mind me saying. He's one of the many people that politics and what have you, it just fits beautifully up there and comes out flawlessly. You mentioned, we think about this thing of state and what it seems to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, what it seems to me is when it comes to child welfare problems, we can just say in any individual state. And it creates so much of a chaotic where the federal government has to step in. It's a jurisdiction thing. It's like, well, wait, hold on, look. It's, say for instance, you have something like a robbery, but the robbery takes place on maybe a federal bank or whichever. So now you got the FBI coming in and local police is there, the sheriff department, and everything. Now everybody's trying to figure out who's going to run the show and stuff like that. In my mind, while everyone's trying to figure out who's going to run the show itself isn't getting dealt with. The problem isn't getting solved. We have what I believe is a global child welfare crisis. And I say global because we still have countries that don't even have any kind of child welfare sense and stuff like that. But in more so, let's condense that down to America, a national child welfare crisis. Our child welfare system, and I've said this before on a podcast, was not built to succumb the many people it has. And now we are encompassing all those many youth. Now we're trying to bring in more caseworkers, which we're seeing that caseworkers get burned out or don't want to do this. And we're seeing huge turnover rates, not just in one state, across the board. And we're seeing social workers not even wanting to become social workers and stuff like that. And we're offering incentives, different scholarships, so we can get people in these fields. These are Band-Aids and side effects because we're trying to figure out everything else. But okay, look, this ain't working. Let's have this conversation. This ain't working. And I
it's not funny, but it's yeah.
I'm right there with you.
It's like, what are you gonna do? You laugh or cry because it's like, gosh, you're right. You're
yeah. I made a comment on one of my episodes a few weeks ago, that what our government tends to do, and this is just at the federal level, and I combine because it's not just at the federal level, this happens at the state level too. We sit and talk about things. We can all be in the same room and we believe that something is an issue. It's a problem. That's going to take us many years to be able to vote or say, yeah, we agree that this is a problem. And I mentioned this, and I don't use this as an example lightly. The passing of lynching being a hate crime. We all believe that. Okay, when you lynch somebody, there's some kind of hate there. That's wrong. We all believe that. Years ago. Why did it take all the way to 2022 for that to, and we even think about different things like rights, for youth, rights for and I hate that we have to do this, but it seems like individually, I use this as another example. We have to vote for non-discriminatory policy to protect same-sex couples and adoption or fostering. Like, those are basic rights that should be there and should be adapted already. But we have to make, and these are some things that I feel like all encompass towards the same path. When we speak about child welfare, we speak about making a better system. We speak about, okay, well, this ain't working, well, we got to do something different and whichever. Some of the things that I would say is foster care probably is never. I'm not even gonna say probably, it's never going anywhere. It's gonna be here some kind of form or fashion. CCIs, residential facilities, and so forth are gonna be here some form of fashion. I don't believe that they will ever be completely eradicated. And the one reason I don't believe that is because we don't have enough foster homes or people willing to foster. So in order for those residential facilities to be taken away, because they don't just supplement foster youth, they also supplement juveniles too in some cases. That has to be there. So that's still going to be there. That's one other part about the system. And then we're talking about prevention. We can't begin to think about prevention until we identify that there are generational things, like me and you talked about earlier, that needs to be talked about in a local DHS or agency standpoint. We need to bring that to the forefront, what have you, because if we acknowledge that there's generational things that's happening in families that started maybe in the cocaine and crack epidemic that has went down and started effects to many other families and what have you, then we can go into the community and not try to take away kids, or every time we see an agency vehicle, okay, they're here to take away a kid, let me, instead of doing that, going into the communities and educating, hosting seminars, seeing what the needs is, having town halls, having dialogues and conversations about prevention. How can we help you guys as your health and human services agency and so forth to begin to switch that narrative? Then we'll see a shift. But that's my tangent. Those are some things that when we talk about policy and we argue and we advocate, we're like, well, I want to get rid of, residentials. I want to see better rights for, LGBTQ or Black, parents trying to keep their kids, or, for siblings, to be able to maintain contact, better protections for grandparents fostering or, supporting their kids and stuff like that. There's so many different avenues in this path of advocacy. One thing I would say is we have to start at the root. And more and more as I've been doing this, I feel like the root is starting at prevention and building on. Because if we don't get past prevention, there's still people flowing in and so forth. So unless we, get that prevention at a place of somewhat stability, and when I say stability, I use that lightly because we seem to believe in building systems. And I think, I don't know the person who completely build, a system of child welfare, because there's many hands and part of that. But I don't think they intended for this to be like, okay, yeah, this is going to be it forever. We just kept it that way, and we haven't evolved and changed and so forth. So with everything that I said, I'm interested to hearing your standpoint on some of the policies that has been made, like Family First, and some of the policies that are in the works, as you see, and stuff like that. And how do you see these being effective? Because one thing I did learn is that when we talk about that state difference and stuff like that, policies are impacted differently in different states. They don't look the same, so I'm interested in hearing your input on those.
Oh my gosh. Well, so let me just go to the way beginning and just to say that, yes, there is definitely like a jurisdictional tension between federal power and state power in many senses. in the sense of, executive regulation. So when the Children's Bureau or the Administration of Children and Families wants to do some coordination with state or regional offices, it's not like there's tension in the sense of like cold shoulders and ice, but it's just, there's definitely, I think, a feeling of who's your supervisor and, like that kind of thing, and the complication of lines of authority. And again, that's an administrative thing. That has nothing to do with like politics or policy. Well, it's a level of politics that's administrative, but there's so much of what you had described that is exactly why public administration, and I hope not to overstate the importance of this field, but really public administration speaks to a lot of what you were talking about, even to the point like where you had said many hands, there's many hands in the child welfare system. There's a theory for that in public administration called the many hands problem. And it's just essentially that assigning responsibility to decision makers. So who made what decision is really difficult because we have a very, very, very complicated system of government. And that was intentional. When you look at the founding of our country and you read the Federalist Papers and read the history of the drafting of the Constitution, this was at a time of political turmoil and a strong opposition to unitary power, or the sense that one leader, a king in Great Britain, has the authority to declare rules for the nation, the colonies at the time. And they declared independence. They fought for the revolution. They drafted the Constitution 11 years later in 1787. But what that all was we need process. We need a lot of rules. We need separation of powers, and we need checks and balances. So I think it's really fascinating when you say things like, and this is a governmental reality, that things take years. That's not necessarily because of bad politics all the time, although it is a lot of the time, but it's also just the systematic way that our government was structured. The Constitution lays out a process. It lays out authority for what bodies can do what. And then again, a lot of that is imbued by the spirit of the Federalist Papers and the general feeling at the time of the founding of our country, where at the time they were saying, yeah, process. Let's not have one person, let's have many hands. So that's the foundation that this country was built on, at least administratively. And I think that there's, to talk to a lot of the state dynamic as well, I honestly think too, about in terms of public administration, a lot of these problems go back to unfunded mandates from the federal government, which are basically when the federal government requires or says that a state has to do something without providing money for them to do it. And also that there's this really, people spend their entire careers and they write books and they go to symposiums and whatever else talking about national government. And there's not enough emphasis on state governments because that same complexity exists on state governments. Like every state has the similar structure. Every state has an executive branch, a legislature, and a judicial branch. Every state kind of has these battles with its budget where, who wants to sneak in what rule and everything else. And on a state level, getting back to the 10th Amendment and how a lot of these things are carried out by states, they don't want to hear it a lot of the times when it comes to funding for new money, because budgeting literature makes this clear too, empirically, that really over the last 15 years, since the Great Recession of 2008, state and local governments have been strapped. They're not looking to raise more taxes. They're not looking to raise revenue. The way that they primarily raise revenue, not primarily, but a general way that state and localities raise revenue now is through like bonds and debt obligations and all these like financial machinations, because raising money through tax revenue is really difficult. And especially for states, because the federal government doesn't have rules about this, but some states have constitutional rules. Actually, in each state, each state has its own structure. Each state also has its own constitution. And sometimes state constitutions limit the amount of a tax increase. So there's all these different dynamics. So I think that, and then we go to the fact about social workers and caseworkers. That's a public administration issue, human resource management, and really getting to a point where why are people getting burnt out? In New Jersey, our commissioner, the Department of Children and Families, instituted an Office of Worker Wellness. And it's, I think, one of the first in the country. And it's just about examining worker wellness to see where's the attrition or the turnover rate. Why, and what's some of the secondary trauma that's happening. And also, as states begin to employ more people with lived experience, wellness is going to be critical, because this work is very triggering. And that's honestly one of the reasons I never got into social work, because I don't have the heart for it. I'm a crybaby, and I think that I would take home a lot of grief. And I think that, but again, this is not an inescapable problem. The solution shouldn't be, well, let's just cycle in a new employee every 3 years, or, they'll figure it out. I think the same can be said for public educators in K through 12 schools. We ask the world of these individuals, and we by and large give them very little for it. The income of a social worker is very low, even for people who have graduate level degrees. All these different things that are really administrative matters. But again, how do you increase their salaries? Well, you got to go to the state legislature. How do you go to the state legislature? There's got to be, it's the same conversation we have at a national level, but we have to do it times 50. And then there's territories and, tribes, which are subjects that I'm only learning about now. But just this complexity that is hard to understate, because it's so vast and confusing. And, an unfortunate reality of our system of government is that it's very systematic and legalistic. And we have a system where really you have to have some lived expertise or an advanced degree, some academic understanding of the government in order to properly navigate these systems, because things are written in legalese. You had mentioned federal guidance and how each state interprets it on its own. There's just this nuance that public administration speaks to really clearly, actually, whether it's human resource management or public budgeting or organizational theory. And I'm not trying to sell public administration. I'm really just trying to say that the literature is there, and I can share or whatever. I mean, I think it's just, but public policy is actually not that interesting to me. I don't actually. I work in the public policy arena. I'm a senior policy manager, but I think that it's just, maybe if I'm being generous, it's 60% of the conversation that we should be having. And then 40% is the conversation that none of us are having, which is what you were saying. How do we lean in and really just meaningfully, how do we have a system where everyone knows something is wrong, but we can't do anything about it because of who has what authority, and I don't know, and I think that, but it's on one hand, it's inexplicable and despicable and all these things, but on the other hand, you can read the history of our country and see how this is the echo of history. This is kind of, it's not to, I think the founding of our country was monumental in quite many ways, but. And I just want to say too, to your point about lynching, only recently being, I also think about how unfortunate it is that after the Reconstruction Amendments, so the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment after the Civil War, which abolished slavery and, gave us the Equal Protection Clause and gave, African Americans the right to vote. These things actually weren't realized in our country for 100, how many years? No, some 80 years it must be before the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So I think that we just have this really, one of the things that is so fascinating to me about political science and public administration, it's not actually the field of study. I think it's quite boring. It's the fact that there's this disconnect, that there's all this going on, but then we do very little of it. We have very little of the conversation that we really need to be having. because it's difficult, it's emotional. We have to lean in. It's not just about policy, it's about personal stuff. It's about how do you select for empathy? How do you choose that in a caseworker? Like, there's not a quiz for that. So how do you evaluate that, in the hiring process? Like, it's nuanced and it's rich and it's difficult, but you're right. I think it's the most insightful thing. And it's one of the reasons I think public administration is so critical, is because public policy is not going to take us there. You can sign all the laws you want, but people are not computer programs. You don't write a code into the computer and it executes it properly with legislation, because people take the code and they hear it how they want. And it's not like a critical theory. It's just a basic part of interpreting law. But we're not even close, honestly, in my opinion, to getting to the level. Like, even public administration literature is not even close to, because child welfare is this microcosm of so much in our government.
Definitely.
It's more than just, and also, like you're suggesting, I'm sorry, this will be the last thing, but like, just like you're suggesting, these public policies are not pretend. There are children and families that get affected every single day by like government inaction. And I, again, I go to the point about dials in my life and how if one dial was switched, I don't know where I would be. I think it's tragic, and we really need to hold ourselves accountable and ask ourselves questions about our political priorities sometimes, when we let partisanship or gamesmanship get in the way of doing for children and families in public service. That's big, not just in child welfare and public education, everywhere, but public administration speaks to it.
Definitely. And it's, it's crazy to me because, I don't know if you know, but I'm a political science major, actually a double major in political science, law and society, with a minor in public administration. And
yes.
The reason why,
it's awesome.
I started out social work, went to criminal justice, and found my way here. I just realized there's a need for critical thinking and outside the box thinking. And we're seeing that more so, through our children, and through people, even around my age, because I'm not too old, 24, I'll be 25. So, I say that my age on down, people are upset of how our country, how our world looks. We're seeing that through people like Greta Thunberg. Hopefully I said her last name right. and through the many youth that are leading Black Lives Matters protests out of their high schools, to the youth that are leading protests out of their high schools for because they've had another youth that has came to their school and did a school shooting. Our kids, our young foster youth, our alumni, our people in this great country of America are getting to a place of sick and tired before they even reach 18. And I see that as a political science student, as a major, as a person that has been advocating in this arena and just doing all this and critically thinking, I see that as an issue. Because before they even get the degree, burnout is sitting in because of all you have to endure barrier-wise in life to get there. And I mean, we can argue, with some of the older generations saying like, well, I had to go through this and stuff like that. But the issue, as we evolve as humans, what I have seen is our younger generation has become a little bit more sensitive, but sensitive does not mean a bad thing. For me, that means that there's more empathy, there's more sympathy building up in this generation, which is a good thing. That is the involvement, and I see that as a side effect of that has been racism, has been gender discrimination, and sexual orientation discrimination, and a side effect of that has been this involved this evolving piece of being to being more sensitive towards people's feelings, to how people react to things, to when I step into this environment, what am I displaying, you know? And when you're facing a world, because the reason I do my advocacy, and I'm sure it's similar to what you do, it's not for myself, because I'm not gonna be able to reap most of the things that I'm advocating for. It's for the people coming behind me that it can be that much more better, you know. Because the reality is, even when I'm long and gone, I truly hope that things that we were nitpicking and arguing about are somewhere. I don't think that'd be completely, but somewhere near, you know, a turnover and what have you. But you know, that's something I have seen, because you know, we can take
Share that.
we can take the label. Excuse me. We can take the label of, okay, well, this person's a foster youth, or this person has been homeless, or this person had parents that were substance abuse but never entered this. So we can take the experience of having any kind of at-risk connection away and say you've had a perfect family household. That doesn't take away your experience of getting to a place of being trauma-filled, you know, having such and such many barriers come to you. By the time you're 18, you're suffering from a mental breakdown, you know. Like it doesn't matter, you know. And I say that because, you know, I've faced people that were like, well, there's a lot of funding, there's a lot of resources already. Okay, well, let's take that out of the equation. You know, let's take that. Okay, so say for instance, I did have, you know, decent working parents, decent household. Now we're making it more of an economical situation, because it takes 2 minimum wage jobs, sometimes 3 minimum wage jobs, depending on where you're living at, to survive. So now I don't even see my parents because they're always working.
Yeah.
So who's supposed to support me in doing homework? You know, now we're in a whole different route. So go ahead.
I think that there's a richness to life that we're only now recognizing, and a richness to identity, and just leaning into what it means to be who we are in a way that we haven't done in history before. And I wanted to say this earlier when you mentioned about the generational thing and how people only recently recognize mental wellness. I think it's so profound that okay, first of all, that's a very profound observation. And it's very profound because Sigmund Freud developed like the idea of ego at like, I don't know, in like 1920 or the early 1900s. So we really are only sitting on 100 years of understanding of this thing called the psyche, and this thing called an internal self. And since then, and he wasn't the first psychologist, but like he was the most popular. But ever since then, we've just had this, we're only now. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is this, that only in the last 100 years, we've had a concept of psychology and an inner self. We've philosophically kind of talked about that before with I Think, Therefore I Am from Rene Descartes, but we really had a concrete observation, a theory from Freud and other psychologists. And we're talking about 100 years of that knowledge. And then only within the last generations that we can see in our lives, people are only starting to embrace these concepts and embrace what it means to emote. And that it doesn't mean that you're less of someone. It means that you're processing in a healthy way. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. It makes you clear-minded. I think it's so profound, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's really difficult to feel that way sometimes. And you know, who am I to say too? Because you know, I sit in the world as a white cis hetero able-bodied middle-aged male or young adult male. You know, and I am incredibly challenged by the world that we live in and the oppressive, frankly, circumstances. And I see them a lot of the ways in America as being class-based dynamics of, you know, a very high echelon socioeconomic class that exerts subtle yet significant influence over political institutions. And it's not like a conspiracy. Like I'm not like a conspiracist or something, but like, this is just, again, like a sociological observation about the dynamics of class and the dynamics of power that move through society and that we see move around society. But young people are the future. And that's not some like platitude anymore. We're seeing that with the examples that you talked about and with many others. Young people saying enough is enough. I've been listening to, Black History Month, I listened to a lot of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches and other leaders' speeches, and I recall his quote around that a riot is the voice of the unheard. I think that we've had ways of talking about people's anger that we missed the boat on a long time ago. And if we just listen to people who were wiser at those times, we may have been able to get ahead of a lot of the things that we're dealing with now and still doing a very bad job at, because I think that we aren't leaning in as far as we should to these conversations about how, okay, so we know what needs to change. How do you change what we know needs to be changed? And how do you change it? It's not through public policy like we were speaking about earlier. It's through, basic things like funding, or even like making sure that like local community libraries have like robust support and that they're doing constant things, or that there's community events to bring people together and build community, and make sure that families remain intact and strong and get the support that they need, and don't use poverty as this like very shady and explicitly in history racist and still racist, but now it's just like implied through like code and case records, like we call it poverty now. I think that like there are very real, these disproportionalities are very real. Like I think that like we're at a point in society and with the realities of these things that it's really interesting. A lot of this isn't like surprising. This isn't like new information. We're just now realizing like, oh my gosh, this is dreadful. And people are upset. And you're talking about Greta Thunberg. That's a whole other thing. This climate change. They're talking about like, how many other things are we going to have to put on young people to say, this is your future, good luck? Of course people are going to get upset.
You got it. Like, go ahead,
Yeah.
So to bring us back, just like how you said it, for many people, that's their exit out of the system that was supposed to protect them. That's their exit out of the child welfare system. You got it. Go ahead. This is your problem now, and I do not have the statistics around it, but I'm pretty positive the population of foster youth, people go in and age out, succumbs a good percent of what makes up America. And I did a paper when I was in high school about what is the disparity in percentage of people who probably should have had some kind of intervention or support that ended up on death row. People who probably should have been in foster care or had been in foster care or had some kind of encounter that found themselves in yet another, what I call quote unquote pipeline, a systematic pipeline. And there's many talks about, and I will say this in closing, there's many talks about the complexity, of what we call our government, our legislative process, our judicial, or our executive, our state, and local and community, and within those complexities, those are built upon system after system after system. And how do we get back in touch, break away from not so much of the system, the mechanics of that, but get back in touch with the people on people, because I for one, it's hard to be a hardened human being when you're faced in front of what you have to work with. When you're faced behind a computer screen reading someone's story and okay, we just gonna give this person 10 to 25, or we're gonna move this person foster home to the, it's easy to do that when you're not faced in front of a person and stuff like that. So I say this in closing, that's a lot of change, and there's many conversations that still need to be had. I mean, I had a couple list of questions, but I feel like this is the conversation that needed to be had for some of you guys that are listening, to invoke, conversation in your own homes, or even critical thinking in your own minds, because as I rant and tangent on, it just, for me, I would love to see the day where families get back around the kitchen table and eat dinners together and just talk about their days and talk about what's happening in the world. Because I believe those conversations like that invoke change. I continue to do this advocacy to hope that we can bring back those lunchroom conversations where a group of kids are just talking about some real issues, and it's crazy because I remember my greatest conversations being around that high school lunch table, and then going back somewhere and asking the question to an adult and being unvalidated for me wanting to know about it. So I say all this to say that keep the conversations going. If you have a young kid or whichever, it's important to draw those boundaries and limitations on trying to protect them and so forth. But also, I believe that with communication and dialogue saves that individual from going to so many different pathways or seeing some things the hard way. And unfortunately, being in the
One
system,
I'll take sometimes.
Definitely, unfortunately, being in the system, I had so few of those conversations. I faced every hard, like it was wall after wall at 18. And by grace of God, I survived, and I'm not ashamed to say that I had been homeless probably about 3 times, before reaching 20, and just trying to find my way. And throughout that time, I had to work many jobs. There was many times when I was working 5 jobs, just to survive, and just to keep things going. So it seems chaotic. It seems like a lot, and I don't have these conversations to stress anybody out. I have these conversations to just be able to invoke and educate, and in hopes that, you can take these conversations with you and start them with somebody else. And maybe you may be that one moving piece that create that change, and so forth. But it has been an honor, having you on, Scout. I appreciate you,
Yeah, please. This was great. I mean, and if can I just say something in closing too, just about your show?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of ties in with what we were just talking about too, with stories. Stories, I walked into this PhD program expecting to learn a lot about data and falling in love with data. Instead, what I've fallen in love with is qualitative methods, and specifically a method called ethnography, which is just it's a research method of telling stories about people and really studying people and cultures. And it's really rooted in hearing people and honoring them and respecting them. And I think that there's just so much richness in foster care that, well, I'll say in the alumni community or the people who've aged out. Diversity, I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot about, frankly, some of my biases in the past and how to work past them. I've learned so much and I've grown so much because of the connections that I've made in the advocacy community. So that's one thing. The second thing is your show here is telling a story that's in many ways untold. I'm glad that there are people, who are using their story now to write books and really put themselves on a platform. I think that's beautiful. And I think this is beautiful. And I think that there's something truly history making here about what you're doing and about the work that the movement has been doing. And the piece about ethnography is around, I consider this, and I'm not a scholar or something in that, but, I consider this to be this show to be a level of quality and uniqueness, and like this special chapter in the saga of a movement that is driven by young people. And honestly, like not even me, like I come at this movement as someone who frankly, the way I put it is like survivor's guilt. Like, I just feel very bad in a lot of ways about the experiences that I had, in the sense that I knew so little of the disruption that so many people had. Like, to hear, and I hope you don't mind my saying, I'm sorry that and I'm glad for you that you were able to grow past that, and with your, with your faith and your network and your village. Because, I just think that it's good for you, for your strength. I just think it's so unfortunate that, like, we let it on you. We put it on you to say, do it, or good luck, instead of having these rich conversations about what it means to understand someone's experience. The point that you made about a judge, and how a judge just reads a case record about an individual and doesn't see the richness, feel the richness, know that they're a father, know what that means to them and their child. There are so many qualitative things that are missing from the way that the world operates, and that's not like some fairy dust. I think that there's like a real discussion. And also, the last thing I'll say is that the truth isn't with academics. Like, I spent some time maybe talking about the PhD program tonight, but it's not in the academics and the scholars. It's the young people and the people with lived experience specifically. I think that there's a role for like shining a spotlight through literature, but I've learned much more about life from the advocacy community than I ever could from a textbook. About the richness of identity or the richness of diversity more through the advocacy community than I ever could. So I think you're capturing something that's really special, and this was a really beautiful opportunity to be on the show. So thank you, honestly. This has been great.
I appreciate it. And I look forward to having you on again. I mean, there's many different topics and stuff that I know that, you cover and just, is your niche and everything. I just, like I said before, I appreciate it, and I'm honored to be able to speak with you, and I hope to be able to speak with you again in the future. This has been a journey, I feel. To some, our conversation, that this has been a journey. And it may have seemed dysfunctional, chaotic, but deep, in-depth conversation like these, because I've had a couple of them, embody what our systems, what our world looks like. And it can't help to look and be a reflection of what it is, so I hope, in listening to this, you can take something from it, and not just this episode, but from all my episodes and so forth, and the ones coming to the future, because that's what I'm doing this for. I have many, I say it's probably on both hands, I can say the many different facets of why, but the top one is to be able to have a platform where people can share their truth, their experience, and their knowledge and their expertise, no matter where they're at, whether they're professional, still going through the storm, about to be over the storm, or what have you, because I believe those stories, those experiences, much like you said, Scout, means the world. And that is true experience that can invoke change. Because when we understand the process of how this person got from here, where they're at here, and then now they're okay, or in a place, quote unquote, okay, we can understand where the resources need to be implemented. How do we support and rally around? And how can we accompany what we already have is in the policy, what we need to do as people to support the workers that are working with these people, and how do we bring community back to it? Because that's it. That's it. And there's so many different facets, but that's one of the biggest reasons. So without further ado, I say this all the time, and end of this, COVID is out there. It is real. It is happening, as you're thinking about getting vaccinated, you're doing your research, whatever, finish up your research, read it thoroughly, get comfortable and make that decision, get vaccinated. If it ain't for you, I respect it. I do respect it. But what I will say is please make sure that you're taking the right precautions to protect yourself and protect your village, because it takes all of us working together. Whether you're vaccinated, not vaccinated, you have your own beliefs, whichever. We all should be washing our hands. We all should be sanitizing. We all should be wearing a mask if we're feeling sick or down, and stuff like that. We all should be doing what we need to do as basic human beings to support one another, because it takes all of us. We all are this big village, and if one person, as we've seen with COVID, all it takes is one person, being in one room and coughing, it spreads, every single body. So if we use that analogy and being nice, being kind, being supportive and stuff like that, and okay, if I say one good thing to somebody, if I wear my mask, because I'm feeling a little bit sick, how many people am I impacting? If we just think about that. But that's my little spiel, for you guys. Take it or leave it, throw it at the door, whatever. This has been Resilient Voices and Beyond. It has been an honor to be able to, speak with you, Scout, and it's been an honor to be able to speak and share this knowledge and wisdom to you guys listening. You guys have a great night, great morning, great whenever you're listening to it. Just let it be great. And just remember, I'm here for you. I'm willing to listen. If you're wanting to be on here, feel free to DM me or reach out, and continue to follow Scout and his work. I know he's working with NFYI and doing a lot of advocacy things. So, continue to follow what he's doing. Send him some support and kind words towards his PhD program. I know he probably gets stressed sometimes. So, everybody can use a little motivation. So shoot him some positivity, and you guys stay safe out there. And till next time.